Boker Tov. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see everybody in person. Feels like forever ago that we were here only a few weeks ago, but the world has changed dramatically. So much has changed. But I'm excited to be able to be here in person with you and to be able to learn together. I know some of you even were able to join the online series that Young Israel ran when the OU wasn't doing their series. So it was nice to. I'm glad that we were able to have that, and that those of you who were able to join. I hope that was meaningful for you during a time when it was hard to leave the home. And of course, our learning should be a continued zichus for all of our chayalim. Just 2 days ago, unfortunately, we heard about a chayal from Ranana, in Oleh, from Ranana, who unfortunately was killed in Gaza. And it should be a zichus for all of our chayalim, those who have been killed. It should be a refuah for all those who have been injured, a zichus for all those who have been impacted by everything that's going on in the war, and more specifically the destruction that the country experienced over the last couple of weeks. All those people who are displaced, should be a zechus for them. And of course, as we always finish, Hashem should give our leaders the wisdom and guidance to make the right decisions moving forward. Be'ezrat Hashem. Okay, so we had been talking last about tefillah in Beit HaKnesset, the concept or the power of davening in a shul. And I wanted to conclude that conversation today. What we're going to do today is something a little bit different than we've done, in that although we always base ourselves off the source sheets, but I always generally try to find somewhat short sources to be able to kind of move from one to the next. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different. I included a number of relatively or particularly longer sources, one from the Maharal and one from the Soloveitchik. And I'd like to go through it because I think that, whereas I generally try to keep the sources a little bit shorter to keep things moving, sometimes it's good to immerse yourself in the actual text itself and to see the flow of the text. And I think here's an example of where both the Maharal specifically and Rav Kook second and then Rav Soloveitchik third have a number of beautiful essays where they really develop really meaningful and beautiful ideas regarding davening in a shul, and I think it's powerful for us to kind of see it inside. So we're going to be a little bit more based on the sources than we often are. We're going to see a lot of it inside. I'll read a lot inside, but I will translate everything that we go through. So just bear with me, because I think sometimes it's good to really be able to kind of do a deep dive into the sources and really see the ideas as they develop. As a background to some of those sources, we're going to repeat a couple of Gemaras that we've seen already, and because much of, at least the beginning, we're going to start with an essay by the Maharal, and much of the Maharal is based off of explaining a couple of foundational Gemaras regarding davening with the tzibur. So we're going to start with source number one. Is a Gemara that we've seen. We saw it a couple of weeks ago. I don't want to go through it again. And what the Maharal is going to do is try to explain certain imagery that this Gemara creates. Source number one, Amar Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says the following thing: Kol mi sheyesh lo Beit HaKnesset be'iro, anyone who has a shul in his city, ve'eno nichnas sham lehitpalel, and does not go there to daven, nikra shachen ra, he is called a bad neighbor. Shene'emar, as the pasuk says in Yirmiyahu, Ko amar Hashem al kol shchenei haraim hanigaim benachala asher hinchalti et ami et Yisrael. So says Hashem, all of these bad neighbors who are associated with the location, with the nachal, with the inheritance where I have placed Am Yisrael. So there's a reference to the concept of a shachen ra, okay? And the Gemara says off of that's connected somehow to davening. Why? Velo, says the Gemara, velo od, ela goreim galut lo ulivanav. That people who don't daven in shul cause galut, they cause exile to him and to their children. Shene'emar, hineni nitshem me'al admatam, I am going to abandon them, or I'm going to, I think natash is to like abandon, is literally to like ignore and abandon them, or I'm going to drive them from their land. Ve'et Beit Yehuda etosh mitocham, and the Yehuda, the house of Yehuda, I am also going to drive out from amongst them. So says the Gemara, off of this, we see that somebody who doesn't go to shul is called a shachen ra. Okay, now what does a shachen ra mean? A bad neighbor. A bad neighbor to who? Hashem. Bad neighbor to Hashem. Does anyone understand it differently? Okay, it could be a bad neighbor to the community. Okay, so those are two interpretations, and we're going to see the Maharal is going to actually adopt both of those interpretations and explain why is the Gemara using this imagery. I mean, the Gemara is being very specific about the imagery here. Why is there an association between a shul or the absence of a shul and this concept of being a good or bad neighbor? Okay, so let's put that.
Was your actual neighbor. Every morning when you say that,
yeah, correct. So there, a shachen ra is what? A bad neighbor. The guy next to you, right. So then here the question is, what does it mean when it says shachen ra? So you understand to mean referring to the guy next to you. You're being a bad neighbor if you don't come to shul, and interestingly enough, you understood it as being a shachen ra to Hashem. And those are the two different interpretations. And the Maharal is going to expand upon that. Yes? Of course, there's certainly a practical element that you're pointing out, which is sometimes the shul needs you for the minyan. But I think the Gemara is even saying more than that. Even if the shul doesn't need you for a minyan, if you're not a part of the community, then you're choosing not to be a part of the community, and the shul represents that community. Yes.
Two questions. Number one, Nichnas is how often or on a regular.
Good question. Good question. The Gemara doesn't define.
Question two: what if he goes to another shul?
So we're not going to touch upon that today. It could be we're going to touch upon that in the next class, which is the whole conversation about breakaway minyanim or the sanctity of a shul. I don't know if we're going to get into that, and I'm debating whether we're going to get into that, because that's a halachic discussion more than anything else. It's a very, very good question. The Gemara doesn't qualify here, and this is more of an agadic statement. It doesn't say like how often you have to come. It seems to be the idea being that there's a shul in your community. It seems to be, again, this is my own interpretation. There's one shul in your area, and you choose not to go there. Okay, this isn't one of those like, everyone says like everyone has two shuls, the shul they go to or the shul they refuse to go to, right? So the shul they'll never step foot in. Okay, well, I don't think that's what we're talking about here. I think we're talking about that there's a communal community and a shul, and you're choosing not to, for whatever reason that is, doesn't mean on a consistent basis. It doesn't define it, okay? It's an agadic statement, less halachic, so I don't think it's really defining it. But it's a very good question. Then the Gemara continues. We're on source number 1, 4 lines down, the second word on the line. Amru le Rabbi Yochanan. They said to Rabbi Yochanan the following comment: Ika sabe bebavel. There are a number of elderly people, sabas, grandfathers, who live in Bavel. Meaning there are many people who live in Bavel, and thank God are living a long life. And the Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan was confused. Tama, he asked a question. V'yomar, he said, wait a second. The pasuk says, Leman yirbu yimechem v'yimei v'nechem al ha'adama. It says that you're going to live a long life only in Eretz Yisrael. Meaning, how could these people have been so successful at living a long life outside of Eretz Yisrael when the description of a long life is inside the land? Aval b'chutz la'aretz lo, says Rabbi Yochanan. How did they live a long life in chutz la'aretz? Kevan da amrile. Once they informed Rabbi Yochanan mikadme umechashche lebeit knishta, that these were people who would come early and leave late from shul, meaning these were the people who were dedicated to coming to shul. Amar hainu da'ahanilu. That's why they were able to live a long life. What enabled them, what gave them the zchut to live a long life, even outside of Eretz Yisrael, was the fact that they made the shul someplace they went to early in the morning and late at night. Now again, remember, this isn't meant to be taken literally. Obviously, there are many people who live a long life outside of Eretz Yisrael. But there's something symbolic here, and this is what's being highlighted, the connection between the shul and a long life. And we have to understand exactly what that means. Again, this is something that the Maharal is going to discuss. Continues the Gemara, Kidda Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, just like as we know Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said libnei to his children, Kadimu v'chashichu, get up early and stay late, v'ailu lebeit knishta, and go to the Beit Knesset, to shul, ki heichi ditarchu chayai, so that you will live a long life. There's a certain association with living a long life and people who go to shul and are there in the mornings and are there at night. Continues the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Acha Rabbi Chanina, my kra. What's the source for this idea that there's a connection between going to shul and living a long life? Answers the Gemara. There's a pasuk in Mishlei. Ashrei Adam Shomei Ali. Fortunate is the person who listens to me. Lishkod al deltotai, to someone who stays or is constantly found at my doors, yom yom, from day after day. Lishmor mizuzat pitchi. Somebody who watches or takes or guards over the entrance. The mizuzah is the entrance of my door. So this is a pasuk that's referring to somebody who comes to my entrance, comes to my abode. And then, uktiv basrei, and right after that, the pasuk says, ki motzi'i matzah chayim. Anybody who finds me is going to find life. So the association between people who come to my abode, who come to my entrance, and it also says later they're going to find life, says the Gemara, there's an association between coming to shul and living a long life. Again, we don't fully understand this yet. The Gemara, Maharal is going to try to explain this. One final comment from this Gemara. Amar Rav Chisda, le'olam yikanes adam, shnei pitchim beveit HaKnesset. A person should, when he goes into shul, he should enter two entrances in shul. Two entrances in shul. When you go into shul, you should make sure to go into two entrances. Says the Gemara, shnei pitachim sal kadaitach. Why should you? What if the shul only has one entrance? What are you going to do? Go in, go out? Like, what does that mean? You should go in two entrances. Some shuls they have one door. So what does it mean that you should go in two entrances? Says the Gemara, ela ema shiur shnei pitchim. You should walk in the equivalent of the distance of two entrances. V'achar kach yitpalel, and then you should daven. Meaning, when you walk into shul, you shouldn't walk into shul and right at the entrance walk in and start davening. You should come in the equivalent of as if you were walking through two different entrances, and then you should start to daven. Okay. Now let's skip for now. Let's go to source number 4. We're going to get to that in a second. We're going to start right now. The Maharal opens up his essay explaining that last piece. Okay, so this is, again, a relatively long essay by the Maharal. We're going to go through it piece by piece, really, because he really highlights, he's going to go through each aspect of this Gemara and try to understand every aspect of this Gemara. So first he starts with that question. He says, what does that mean? What's this idea? What's the significance of walking in shiur shnei ptachim, that you should walk in the equivalent of two entrances? So look at source number 4.
You
Yes.
explained it, because you would think you could walk into shul, then leave a little bit and hang out and
Ah,
and then
good.
walk in another way. So I was like, wow, like this is so exciting. And,
Let's see. So let's look at how the Maharal explains it. Source number 4. Mishleimut ha'avodah sham. Amar Rabbi Chisda. Source number 4, the first line. Le'olam yikanes adam shnei pitachim. You should go in two entrances. Ask the Gemara, shnei pitachim tzal kadaitach. Should it be two entrances? Ela emor shiur shnei pitachim ve'achar kach yitpalel. Rather, answers the Gemara, it should be the distance, the equivalence of going in two entrances and then daven. Uperush, says the Maharal, what's this explanation? Zeh, she'em yikanes shiur petach echad, ein hapetach echad more rak al hasiluk mibachutz bilvad. Says if you only went in the equivalent of one entrance, then all you would be doing is basically removing yourself from the outside world. Says the Maharal, I'll explain what I mean. Look at the underlined part. Okay? Dahainu shehu misalek atzmo mikol iskei haolam ve'ein ze hityachdut legamrei im Hashem yitbarach. If you only go through one entrance, what's the significance of the two entrances? Says the Maharal, the significance is that when a person davens, he's meant to, in your preparation for davening, to go through two stages. Stage number 1 is to symbolically and physically remove yourself from the outside, from the world around you, to remove yourself from all of the distractions of the world you are in, right? Many of us know how hard it is to come to davening and just shut everything off. There's 2 stages. We need to first remove ourselves from the world around us. Stage 2 is to actively initiate connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that is signified by the 2 entrances. We need to step 1 is removing my focus from everything else around me, trying to take a moment to just, or 2 moments, or 10 moments to help myself focus. That's stage 1, removing outside distractions. Stage 2 is I am now about to enter a connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that requires stage 2. If you just rush in and you think that all of a sudden in a minute you're going to be able to get rid of everything and do everything you need to do in order to daven and have appropriate davening, says the Maharal, it's never going to happen. So look at how he says it. Dahainu, we're getting to the underlined part. Shehu misalek atzmo mikol iskei olam. One thing you're trying to do is remove yourself from all the distractions of the world around you. Ve'ein zeh hityachdut legamrei. But if you just did that, if all you did was remove your distractions, you wouldn't yet be initiating that what he's calling hityachdut, that connection, that bonding with Hashem. Shetzarech el zeh shnei dvarim. In order to accomplish this, you need two things. Ha'echad, hasiluk mikol hadvarim. One is to remove all distractions, trying to get that out of your mind. V'hasheni lehityached im Hashem yitbarach asher hu mitpalel lefanav. You also need to initiate a connection, a yichud, but the best word is, I think, some kind of a bonding, yachad, connection and bonding with Hashem that you're davening to. We mentioned this when we talked a while ago, very beginning of the year, about one of the goals of tefillah, and we pointed that one of the goals of tefillah is very simple, is to just connect to Hashem, is to cleanse ourselves spiritually by creating a bond with Hashem. So says the Maharal, ve'ein zeh below zeh. You can't have one without the other, okay? She'im ein misalek atzmo bikol hadvarim. If you run in and say, okay, I'm ready to connect to Hashem, but you haven't removed yourself from all the distractions of the world around you, shehem bachutz, av shehu poneh Hashem yitbarach u'mitpalel lefanav, even if you daven and you try all your heart and you want to connect to Hashem, mikom makom yesh kan eruv hamachshava. You're going to have a constant, your thoughts are going to be all confused, right? It's going to be all over the place because you didn't adequately remove yourself from the world around you before you try to connect to Hashem. That is going to affect your ability to connect with Hashem. And then he says, if the opposite, if you remove yourself from the world, you're able to get yourself out of all the distractions of this world. You still need stage two. Stage two is the active connection with Hashem. By the way, that is why, according to many opinions, we take 3 steps forward. The 3 steps forward is basically saying, I am now entering God's abode, God's domain, and that is an active way of trying to create that connection, create that bond, initiate that bond. Lefikach tzarich sheyikanesh shiur shnei ptachim. That's why the Gemara says you need to enter 2 entrances. It's symbolic. It's not necessarily halachic. Obviously, it could be, meaning everyone should look around and see, kind of like you pointed out, if you're standing, we all know those people who are standing at the door during davening. Okay, not those who come late. Some who come late, okay, it gets a little bit tricky. How do you get in? But there's always those guys who are right at the door, so that the second it's over, they're done. Okay? Now, sometimes it's me. I have to admit, it depends what's going on, right? Sometimes I'm running late. I understand it. But we all know that it's very, very hard to be able to really, really daven if your mind is elsewhere. And the symbolism here is that you need to do 2 stages. You need to go one petach. One entrance is basically stepping out of the world around us. And petach number 2 is stepping into God's abode. I'll get to your question or comment in 1 second. Just to finish the medrash. Lefikach tzarich shikanei shnei ptachim haknisa. One entrance is removing yourself from this world. And the second entrance is to enter God's abode, to connect with Him. Okay, and that is the Maharal, and that is the reason, says the Maharal, that is the symbolism of going the equivalent of 2 entrances. Yes? Okay, so you're saying, wait a second, what about those people who daven from a telephone, and this is a distraction? So I have to admit, I will mention myself for a second. Forgive me, I don't have my phone is dead actually now, so I'm just going to be looking just to make sure I'm paying attention to the time. So the truth is that I have to admit, for that reason, I personally, for many years, I refused to download the app, the davening app on my phone, because I felt very uncomfortable using my phone to daven. Because first of all, I just felt that symbolically, it was no, my phone is used for other things. And I was also concerned about being distracted. Although I have to admit that in the last little while, I've gotten more practical, because there have been many times where, because I didn't have an app on my phone, I found myself davening somewhere and I didn't have a sitter. So I do download it. What I try to do is, if I'm using my phone for davening, I put it on airplane mode. Airplane mode means I'm not going to get it. Now, again, I will still admit that having my phone out, sometimes still I have certain associations. It still is a different, so everyone has to make that decision. Meaning those kinds of questions are personal questions. What's good? Some people, no, it's just practical to have their phone with them, and they can daven, so I agree with you. I personally, when I'm in shul, much prefer to use a siddur. I think it's just more appropriate, and maybe I'm just more traditional in that way. But the key is the idea, which is that we need to figure out how to, when we're davening, shut off our distractions, and actively also, it's 2 stages. Shut off distractions, actively enter this relationship with Hashem, and that's the symbolism here. Yes? Okay. That's an excellent question. The question was that it's very hard on the our actual life. That's a very, very good point. The question that was asked is basically, it's a little bit of a hard, it's in theory sounds nice, but practically it's a little bit hard. Number one, how do we do this? It's very hard. Number two, sometimes the outside world, what's going on in our lives, is actually what we need to bring to our davening, because it's what makes our davening meaningful. I'm bringing in what's going on in my life, and I agree with you. I don't think getting rid of outside distractions means necessarily that you're forgetting about everything that's going on. What I'm referring to is something probably similar to the scenario that unfortunately happens to me way too often, and probably happens to you as well. Which is, I'm in the middle of Shemona Esrei, and I'm davening, and I'm still going like this, and I'm probably even going like this, and all of a sudden I'm like, what bracha am I up to? Okay, now that's just called the world around me. The world around me has come in, and I'm doing this. I'm like, I think I might have done this already. So all those kinds of distractions, I think, are not necessarily ideal, and those are the ones we're trying to avoid. Getting rid of distractions doesn't mean we're pretending that we don't live life. Getting rid of distractions just means, how can we focus on what we're doing? You want to call it mindfulness, you want to call it meditation, right? We've talked about this, how there were many people, that there is a history. Aryeh Kaplan writes about this in a number of books, there's a well-known Gemara that says that the Hasidim Rishonim used to sit an hour before davening. Okay? Now, it doesn't mean, nowadays it's become that in certain circles that the Hasidim just end up davening really late, right? They daven at 12 o'clock shacharis because what it used to be was they would come an hour before davening, they would learn, but they would also take the time to focus. Sometimes focusing your mind requires just effort and time. Again, I can't say I'm good at it. I'm not, but from what I understand, it's what we call meditation very often is just focused thinking. And sometimes you just need to sit there, whether it's 5 minutes, whether it's 10 minutes, whatever it is, where you just sit down and you say, okay, now I'm davening. And now I'm going to try to do my best to push out whatever thoughts are not connected to that, and daven. Now, agreed, when I started saying Rafa'inu, is my mind going to go to the people who are sick? Sure, that's what it should be doing. But it shouldn't be thinking about the baseball game that happened yesterday, which is unfortunately what happens when we don't give it that proper thought. I think that's what we're referring to here. I don't think we're saying, separate everything. It just means distractions that are around us. That's how I understand it. Okay, let's keep going in the Maharal. The Maharal, the next paragraph. Now the Maharal discusses the earlier comment, which was the connection between living in Israel, between the shul and long life. Amnam, second paragraph in the Maharal. Yesh od b'divrei chachamim davar amok. The words of the chachamim have even more depth to them. Asher al zeh amru sheyitzarech sheikanes shiur shnei ptachim dafka. Okay, more than what they just wrote about the fact that you have to enter two. V'zeh kasher tavin hama'amar shelifnei zeh. And that is, if you look into the comment in the Gemara right before that one. She'amru l'Rabbi Yochanan ika sabe bebavel. Again, we're not going to read this whole thing again, but basically he repeats the Gemara, where the Gemara talks about how Rabbi Yochanan heard that there were elderly people who lived in Israel, and he said, how could that possibly be? How could there be elderly people who live in Israel? Live in Chutz La'aretz. They're supposed to live in Israel. The pasuk says that you're going to live long in Israel. The answer was they went to shul. So look at source number, and then the Gemara talks about how there's an association between shul and a long life. Says the Maharal, we're in the second paragraph, the underlined part. V'yesh lifaresh. V'yesh lifaresh. I think it's 2 lines from the bottom on the first page. Okay, sorry. I don't know. That's weird. Okay. Top of the second page then. V'yesh lifaresh. Ki hamakom hu mikayem et hadavar. Says the Maharal, that this is a fundamental idea in the Maharal. Says the Maharal, in the thought of the Maharal in general, the place, or a natural place for a person, is what sustains, or an object or a being is what sustains that object. He says the word makom, place, actually comes from the same word as mikayim, which is to sustain, to keep alive. And he says, hamakom hu mikayim et hadavar shehu mikomo. Shehit ba'er, right? A place is what sustains something, because that is its natural place. Ulikach nikra makom. That's why it's called makom. Shehu mikayem et hadavar shehu omed bar, because it sustains. When something is in its natural place, its natural habitat, that place is what sustains it and what keeps it going. Kikach timsa kol hadvarim asher hativiim asher yesh lekol echad makom. Because when it comes to anything natural has its place of natural habitat, has its place. Ka'asher hu bimkomo hu mikayem. When it's in its natural state, it is sustained in the most ideal way. V'ka'asher yotze min hamakom. When it leaves its natural place, asher hu teva elav, which it is natural for, hu nifsad v'ne'evad. Then it starts to lose part of its essence. And by the way, the Maharal writes about this specifically, just in general, regarding Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. He's going to talk about that right now. He says Eretz Yisrael is the natural habitat and place for the Jewish people. And therefore, what is that feeling we feel when we're walking in this, Yerushalayim or the old city or entering Eretz Yisrael, that thing that we can't really fully formulate? He says that is the sense of a Jew being in his natural place. Okay? Ki ha'avir, let's keep going. Avir ein lo kiyum rak bimkomo, because the air is only fully realized when you're in your natural place. Ukvar heidu al zeh chachamim, and this is something that we talk about a lot, says the Maharal. Now, right, continuing on. Ve'eretz Yisrael hu mikomam hativ'i el Yisrael. He says Eretz Yisrael is the natural place for Am Yisrael. That's why it's called Eretz Yisrael, right? Eretz Yisrael is the land for the nation known as Yisrael. And that's why Ulefikach katav leman yirbu yimechem v'imei v'nechem al ha'adama. And that's why the Torah says, where is a person going to more easily or more naturally live a long life? In Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because this is your natural place, and therefore it is going to sustain you in the most natural way. Okay. V'haya matmi, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan was confused. Rabbi Yochanan said, how could it be? How can it be that there are people living out of their natural habitat where the air is different? And the air doesn't just mean the physical air, it means the metaphysical air is different, and yet they're still able to live a long life. That was his question. They were not in their natural place. And then he adds, other nations, says the Maharal, don't have a specific place that God gave them as their natural habitat. Okay, obviously we have places that are conquered and countries that's where the other nations live, but only Eretz Yisrael has it in this way. Kimo shenatan Eretz Yisrael Yisrael shenechshav mikomam hativ'i legamrei. Kimo kol makom shehu miyuchad la'asher hu makom lo ein lo kiyum ka'asher yotze mimenu. Fundamentally, you can't have an ideal existence if you leave your natural place. And that's where Rabbi Yochanan was confused. Then they responded. What did they respond? Oh, I'll tell you how they're able to live a long life. Why? Because they go to shul. So look at the underlined part. Vizeh, with the second paragraph, the second underlined part at the bottom of the paragraph. Vizeh ki ka'asher makdimim u'mashchikim lebeit ha-knesset. U'ki'ilu beitam tafel eitzel beit ha-knesset lo tuchal lomar she'en zeh bekomo. Once he heard that the people were getting up early and going to shul and staying late and going to shul, which meant what was their main place that was their natural habitat? It wasn't their home, it was the shul. When these people made the shul the place where they went, where they kept as their main abode, then it almost took on the status of Eretz Yisrael. It almost was like Eretz Yisrael, and that was what sustained them. Ki Beit HaKnesset ra'oi b'kol makom, because a Beit HaKnesset has a certain status wherever it is. Ki, as the pasuk says, mi mizrach shemesh ad mivuo mihulal shem Hashem. From the east of the sun until mivuo, until wherever we come to mihulal shem Hashem, we are going to praise Shem Hashem. So wherever a shul is, the shul has that status. Umakom beit hakneset b'kol ha'olam kasher mashkim uma'ariv lebeit hakneset oseh beito tafel ubeit knesset ikar. By making the shul the place where he came early and went late and stayed late, that became his point of focus. And by the way, it doesn't necessarily mean that he spent more hours in shul than he did at home. You could spend less hours in shul and more hours at home, but where is your focus? Where is your mind? Where is your spiritual, goals? It's what you were doing in shul, the davening and the learning that you do in shul. And that gave them a sense of spirituality. It was as if, says the Maharal, they were living in Eretz Yisrael, and that is what enabled them to be able to then daven and to live a long life. And then he goes on and talks about how, and this is another important point, the Maharal then goes on to talk about how the shul fundamentally is the Beit Hashem, is the house of Hashem, it's the house of God. And therefore, when these people associated themselves with the house of God, God is known as Hashem, a God of life, and therefore they were able to live longer because they associated themselves with the shul. That's the Maharal's explanation. But then the Maharal talks about a different medrash. Now let's go back for a second in order to see the next part of the Maharal. We're going to go back now to, again, two Gemaras, two sources that we saw last time, but I want to go over them again. And that is regarding walking to shul. Look at source number 2. Source number 2 is a Gemara in Sota. The Gemara in Sota says something very, very interesting. Hahi almana dahave be kinishta b'shivavusa. There was one almana, a widow, who had a shul in her town. Kol yoma have asya umatzla be midrashay de Rabbi Yochanan. And every day she would go to the next town, to the town where Rabbi Yochanan was, and she would daven in his shul. Amarla, BT, he said to her, young woman, Lo beit Knesset b'shivavotech? Isn't there a shul in your town? Why are you coming to my shul? Abrale Rabbi v'lo schar psiot yeshli. I'm going to get schar psiot. What's schar psiot? Is that you get a reward for however long, every step you take on your way to shul, you're going to get a reward. So says the woman, I want to get that reward. And therefore, I'm willing to go even further. Now, does this mean that she's called a Shachein Ra because she's not going to her shul? I don't know. It's a very good question. They don't discuss the connection between those two. But what we see here is this concept of schar psiot, that if you have to go farther to shul, the farther you have to go, the more you have to walk to get to shul, you get more schar. Interesting. Says the Maharal, and now let's go back to the Maharal. In source number 4, we're going now to the third paragraph. Okay, we're going to the third paragraph, and we're going to, I'm trying to see exactly, I don't want us to read too much of it. Here, we're going to go to the middle of the fourth paragraph, forgive me. The underlined part in the fourth paragraph. He basically asked the following question. Says the Maharal, we don't see something similar by other mitzvot. For example, let's say I want to fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah. And I have one sukkah that's right over here, and another sukkah that's down the block. Do I get more schar for going to the sukkah that's down the block? Says the Maharal, no. You don't get more schar for going to the sukkah that's farther. So why would there be this idea that when it comes to a shul, if you have a little further to go or you walk even farther to get to shul, you're going to get schar, you're going to get reward for going even further. So says the Maharal in the underlined part in paragraph number 4. V'zeh, ki Hashem yitbarach matzui b'veit hakneset. God is found inside the shul, meaning this is the house of God. Kemosha amru zal ki beit hakneset hu mikdash me'at. As we've seen, the shul is a smaller version of the Beit HaMikdash. V'lekach Hashem yitbarach matzui b'veit hakneset. Hashem is found in the shul. Ulefikach, and therefore, ka'asher holech lebeit hakneset hu nimshach el Hashem yitbarach liyot lo dveikut bo yitbarach. When you are walking towards the shul, and the shul is Hashem's home, and the reason you're walking is because you're now walking to be able to create that connection with God, that entire time you are part of this initiation of connecting with Hashem. And therefore, every step you take where you're anticipating and you're moving towards that connection with Hashem, that itself causes there to be a schar for every step you take. Right? The sukkah isn't the house of God. Every other mitzvot, you're not on your way to Beit Hashem. And when you're on your way towards Beit Hashem, every step you take is an anticipation of creating that connection with Hashem, and therefore you get schar for every step you take. V'yadua Ki hamitnoa el davar, anything who is moving towards something else, hu dveikut gamur im hamitnoa yoter mimishu karev lo kvar. If anyone who connects with someone that he is further from, he's going to connect in a more deeper way than if it takes you longer to get there, and therefore there's more anticipation time. Sometimes the celebration and the connection that is going to be created is greater because it required you to put more effort into it. The anticipation was much greater. And therefore, says the Maharal, there is a certain amount of schar or more schar you get if you come from further on. But let's keep going. It's hot. Am I wrong or is it hot? Should we see if we can get the air on in here? Okay. Okay. Shchinan shachen. Interesting. Excellent. Exactly. So that's exactly what the Maharal, the next paragraph, the Maharal then gets to shachen ra. He says, what does it mean that anyone who doesn't go to shul is a shachen ra? So he says on two levels. He says, first of all, what is the Beis HaKnesset? The Beis HaKnesset is really two things. Number one, it's the house of Hashem. And if you choose, you're in a community, and you're specifically not going to shul, for whatever reason that is, you're a shachen ra to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He doesn't mention the connection to Shekhinah. I think that's a very interesting idea. But he says you're a shachen ra because, again, this is Hashem. This is the Beit Hashem. And this is where Hashem is found. And if you choose not to go there for whatever reason, you are a shachen ra to Hashem. But then he also says, what is a Beit HaKnesset? Beit HaKnesset is a Beit HaKnesset. It is the focal point of the community. Now, perhaps this is more so in Chutz La'aretz, and it's becoming more in Eretz Yisrael, but it hasn't been as much, that the shul becomes the center of the community. Okay, we know that's one of the things that many people who make Aliyah are frustrated with, that sometimes in Chutz La'aretz, the shul is the center of davening and social activities and programming. And so, unfortunately, in Eretz Yisrael, it's not always so. But either way, the idea is it's certainly the place where everyone comes to connect with Hashem. And if you, as a shachen, choose not to join that, not to be a part of that, says the Maharal, that is why you're called a shachen ra. Okay, I'm just keeping an eye on the time. Okay, I'd like to move on now, and I'd like to do a couple of more sources with you, just to again continue to develop this idea. Rav Kook talks about lots of this in a lot of different places. The makom, the concept of a makom, that's a very big idea in the Maharal. Rav Kook also develops it. Maharal talks all over about the concept of makom and natural habitat, and that you're yourself. That Hashem is hamakom also. That's also an interesting question. What does that mean that Hashem is hamakom? But it means that He sustains the whole world. Yes, correct. Okay, look at source number 5. This is a Gemara we saw as well. And again, Rav Kook tries to understand what does it mean. Tanya, Abba bin Yamin Omer, Ein tefillah shel Adam nishmat ela beveit HaKnesset. Says Abba bin Yamin that the tefillah of a person will only be found in shul. Why? Shene'emar lishmoa el harina ve'el hatefillah. The pasuk says you should listen to the song or the rejoicing and to tefillah. Bimkom rina sham tehei tefillah. Wherever there is rejoicing and singing, that is where tefillah should be. So says Rav Kook, why? Ask Rav Kook, why? What is the connection between tefillah and rina? So look at source number 6. We're not going to do all of this inside, but says Rav Kook the following. And again, Rav Kook is very hard to understand. I'm going to do my best to translate the idea as best as I understand it, but his language is very, very poetic and sometimes a little bit harder to fully grasp. Yesod hadvarim, says Rav Kook the following. Fundamental idea. Ki hine tachlit hatfilah hem shnei dvarim. The purpose of davening is two main things. There are two main aspects that are the purpose of davening. Sheleumatam nechleku chelkei tefillah. That corresponding to them, the Torah has been divided into different parts. And they are Rina and Tefillah. What is Rina and Tefillah? Says Rav Kook. Dahainu shevach ubakasha. Says Rav Kook, if I had to basically distill davening into its most fundamental parts, the two main parts of davening are shevach. What's shevach? Praise Hashem, and bakasha is requesting from Hashem. Ha'echad hu shesham Hashem yitbarach, Hashem yitbarach chok be'olamo shal yedei tfilat adam yish'eh lo tzrachav. Sorry, there's a typo there. One aspect is that Hashem created the world where in order to receive things, you have to request them from Hashem. Bakasha is, in order for us to receive things, we have to ask Hashem to give us things. right? As it says, Utfilat Yisharim Ritzono, Ve'et Shavatam Yishma V'Yoshiem. V'hasheni, we're in source number 6, the middle of the third line. What's the second aspect of davening? Sheyotzi ha'adam shleimuto min ha'koach el ha'poal bihiyot misader rayonav l'saper begdulatot shel hakadosh yisbarach ulhargil deotav v'kol kochot nafsho lachzot b'noam Hashem. The second aspect is that a person actualizes his potential when he recognizes the greatness of God and strives to better understand what he calls lachzot b'noam Hashem, to see the splendor and to appreciate it. And says Rav Kook, that's what the purpose of Shevach is. Why do we praise Hashem? The praising of Hashem is for us to try to, on whatever level we can, understand and connect to the greatness of Hashem. So says Rav Kook, there's two aspects to tefillah. There's bakasha, requests from Hashem. That is the way that God created the world, that we need to ask in order to receive. And there's something called shevach, where we're praising Hashem. And if you look at many of our tefillot have one of those two. There's also something called hoda'ah, thanking Hashem. He's not referring to that right now. Says Rav Kook, those two things, bakasha and shevach, they are two distinct forms of tefillah, but they go hand in hand. When the Gemara says that tefillah has to take place in a place of rina, that tefillah has to be in a place where we sing, that's basically saying you can't separate these two. You can't say, oh, I need to daven and ask for things, and then at some point I also need to talk about how great Hashem is, connect to how great Hashem is, etc. No, the two need to go hand in hand. Why, says Rav Kook? Because ultimately, when we talk about asking for Hashem, it is true that one of the reasons we ask for something from Hashem is because we want, in order to receive it, we have to ask for it. But he says there's a much deeper reason. What's the purpose? The deeper idea behind needing to ask Hashem for things is that we thereby come to the recognition that who is the source of everything? God. Meaning, the deeper meaning of the bakasha is to ultimately bring us to another level of shevach, of praise. When we recognize, if every day we turn to Hashem and say, give us life, give us parnasa, give us health, we're doing that in order to receive it, but we're also doing it because it then ingrains within us that Hashem is kol yachol. Hashem is the source of all of this. So the deeper idea of why we need to ask for things is not just practically to get them, but to help us come in a different way to a deeper understanding of the greatness of God. And therefore, the Gemara says, tefillah has to take place in the same place where you have rina, where you have song, where you have praise. Why? Because ultimately the tefillah, which is the bakasha, his ultimate goal is to also help us achieve the rina, the song, the praise. And therefore, says Rav Kook, the two of them need to go hand in hand. Yes? Did what exist before the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash? That form of davening? Did shul exist? It's a very, very excellent. So it is a big, big discussion. I was recently reading a book by Rabbi Steinsaltz, who has a whole book on the history of shul and synagogue, or just davening in general. There's a big it's pretty clear that there was some form of a synagogue, of a shul, even during the times of the Beit HaMikdash. The exact role that it played might have been different. Again, we were talking about how the shul is the Beit Hashem. When there's a Beit HaMikdash, you have a different Beit Hashem. But then again, we also know the shul acts as a place where people gathered. Not everyone can gather at the Beit HaMikdash. Who can't gather at the Beit HaMikdash? And it was not a kohen. There was only a certain level you could go to. So there was something called the shul, and there was also something called davening. When it became what it became now is not so simple. It's subject to debate. It seems like the way that the shul as the center of what it is right now, as the center, as the Mikdash Me'at, that more came about after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And the same thing with tefillah as we know it. But it's not so 100% clear. It's a very good question. Correct. Yes, we've talked about that. Yeah, this is part of it. Yeah, we talked about how tefillah did exist, for example, in times of the Torah. Moshe just a few weeks ago, Kelna Rafan Allah, please Hashem heal Miriam. That's a form of davening. Tefillah did exist, right? We know tefillah existed. Avram davened for Sodom. Tefillah certainly existed, but it was a different type of tefillah, and it didn't always have the form that we have it now. Is more post-destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, what I'd like to do now is we're actually going to skip to the last source, which is a long source, but this is a beautiful essay by Rav Soloveitchik. I mentioned today that we're going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive and really focusing on the text, because I think sometimes it's powerful to just see an idea as it's developed as opposed to just seeing excerpts. So the truth was this essay was so long that I still had to bring you excerpts, but I tried to keep a certain flow. So I want you to bear with me. Rav Soloveitchik his opening premise is, how do we make shul meaningful? He was lamenting the fact that this is already in the 70s and the 80s, I think, that he wrote this. Lamenting the fact that the institution of a shul was not becoming, and this is in Chutz La'aretz, was not as strong as it had been. People weren't coming to shul, less people were davening with a minyan. And says Rav Soloveitchik, why is that? Why is it that the shul is not as strong as it once was? And that's where we're coming to in source number 9. Bear with me, I'm going to read certain parts of it, but he really develops two beautiful ideas regarding what a shul is that I wanted to highlight. Says Rav Soloveitchik in source number 9, is there a cure? Is there a way to resolve this problem? Again, the problem he's referring to is the fact that less people are coming to shul, less people are becoming a part of this shul. I do not know, says Rav Soloveitchik. I have no solution to offer. However, I believe that a deeper understanding of synagogue as an idea, not only an institution, is required. To understand the synagogue as an institution is easy. However, institutions are nurtured by ideas. Behind every stable, fixed, standardized institution, there is a beautiful idea, a great vision, and a great experience. No one has ever tried simply to explain the synagogue to people as an idea, as a vision, rather than as an institution. What's behind this whole idea? Why are we doing this? It's, as opposed to just saying, here's what we are, let's try to explain what this is about. Such an explanation may be helpful. We have seen how rabbis and balabatim, while overemphasizing the institutional character of the synagogue, have completely neglected to bring out the idea, or Weltanschauung, which lies at the very, forgive me for some of the typos, the very root of the institution. We simply did not explain to the young people that tefillah is, and what Beit HaKnesset, the house of dedicated to prayer, means, and how deeply rooted these ideas are in our philosophy of man and his destiny. So then Rav Soloveitchik now goes on to try to explain this. And again, he's going to go through a long background. I'm bringing you pieces of it, and then we'll get to his main point. Basically, tefillah reflects the Judaic philosophy of man, the paradoxality, the exciting vision of man, and also the tragedy of man. The greatness and smallness of man are both reflected in tefillah, in the idea of Beit HaKnesset. And in my lecture tonight, I shall attempt to explain two ideas which underlie prayer in general and the institution of the Beit HaKnesset in particular. Let me start with two postulates. First, man is in exile. Man is a homeless being. He's, by the way, referring to this both, he refers to this, he expands upon this, we're not going to see it now, both as a Jew, that Jews are in a state of exile ever since the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, and he's even referring to it even now, if we've returned home, we're still in a certain sense exile. And then he talks about man as being in a sense of existential exile. That's a theme in Rav Soloveitchik's writings all over the place. Man is a homeless being. Second, exiled man or homeless man must pray. He has a strong need to pray. Through prayer, he redeems himself from his loneliness. Judaism looked upon man from a dialectical viewpoint. Hence, his homelessness should also be understood in a dialectical. By the way, wherever there's 3 dots, it means I skipped parts of the essay, just to be clear. Understood in a dialectical manner. On the one hand, man is a great being, and he is homeless in greatness. Human homelessness and human greatness merge into one existential awareness. On the one hand, man is great. This is the paradox that Rav Soloveitchik talks about a lot. Man is great on the one hand, and man is also small on the one hand. We're able to accomplish so much. On the other hand, compared to the galaxies before us, we're small. On the other hand, man is a small, helpless being, a fallen being, and he is homeless in his smallness. Human homelessness and human smallness merge into one existential awareness. So on the one hand, says Rav Soloveitchik, man on the one hand is great, and he's able to accomplish so much so that we're going to see why, he needs God, because he needs to be able to ground himself in that sense of greatness. On the other hand, he also feels totally vulnerable. He feels small. He says, no matter who we are, no matter what beautiful edifices you can build for yourself, nothing will ever protect you fully from the vulnerability that we have as human beings. And therefore, we're also, as he says, a certain smallness. And that's where prayer comes in. In prayer, both great man and small man find their home. Through prayer, great man finds home, peace, and serenity. And through prayer, small man liberates himself from his fright and dread in the night. Unfortunately, the modern Jew does not know how to pray. The experience of returning home the very moment one starts to read his prayers is unknown to the modern Jew. Okay, now he's going to try to explain what the purpose of shul is. What is the purpose of synagogue? Why does the halacha require a house consecrated to prayer? It must be understood that even a yachid, an individual, should try to say his prayers in the shul. As we pointed out, there is a concept that if you're davening without a minyan, it's still better to come to shul and daven without the minyan, because the shul is a special place for davening. Why is that necessary? It is not the physical structure which is important. It is not so much the roof and not so much the big galleries and the high windows. These are not important. You know, we have never cared about the architecture of the synagogue. People speak about it a lot nowadays, but the halacha was not concerned. What is important, according to halacha, is something else. Bayit in Hebrew has a double connotation. Bayit means a house, the physical structure, 4 walls, a roof, and a floor. And bayit also means a home. We err when we translate Beit HaKnesset as the house of prayer. This rendition is not true. There is no need for a house of prayer, because I can pray to God and I can even kneel to him and have a rendezvous with him anywhere on the globe, even on the outskirts of the universe. I am confronted with God anywhere, everywhere. Beit HaKnesset is not a house, but a home of prayer. The structure is symbolic. Beit HaKnesset, if understood as a house of prayer, is an institution. However, if translated as a home of prayer, it turns into an exalted idea, namely, the home of man, of homeless man, which is at the same time the home of God. As Shlomo, when he dedicated the temple, asked a question, will God in very truth dwell on the earth? Behold, the heavens and the heaven of heavens cannot contain thee. Much less a house? Meaning, how can the shul contain Hashem? How can Hashem exist in a house? God is much greater than that. Says Soloveitchik, there's actually a misnomer here. He says, this isn't really the house of God. It's a little bit different than what the Rabbi is saying. He says the shul is the house of man. It's the house that man has set aside to meet with God. And what is the answer to this question? The Beit HaMikdash is not the home of God, but the home of man where he keeps an appointment with God. God does not need a home for himself. God feigned homelessness in order to induce man to build a home, to build a home for man. And whatever name is assigned this home is to be understood in terms of human, not divine homelessness. It is the home of God because it is the home of man. God comes to that house in order to keep his appointment with man. In a word, man, be he an individual or community, is homeless because he is vulnerable. He is terrorized by the fright of night. He needs a home that will give him security, at least a sense of security and shelter. He will come to this house and he will spread out his hands. That is exactly the idea of a Beit HaKnesset. As we said above, Beit HaKnesset is the home of God because it is the home of man. And so says Soloveitchik, what do we talk when we talk about a shul? Maharal had mentioned this was the home of God. Says Soloveitchik, I'm going to say something a little bit different. What is the Beit HaKnesset? The Beit HaKnesset is the home of man. It is the place where we set aside to rendezvous with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's not a house of prayer, but a home of prayer. That we all know that the connotation of a home versus a house, right? We don't always say, I'm going back to my house. You say, I'm going back home. Home has a certain sense of warmth, a sense of natural, this is my natural habitat. And that, says Soloveitchik, is what the Beit HaKnesset is all about. The idea behind the shul is, this is the home that we have set aside to have a connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, we're not going to be able to do the second part. We'll have to get back to this. You'll have to be a little bit in suspense. Next class, I will come back because he also develops another beautiful idea about Beit HaKnesset that we will do together. Just one technical point. Next week, unfortunately, I will not be here. But we will have class in 2 weeks, Be'ezrat Hashem. I think Rav Sam knows, so they'll probably send out a notice as well. Wishing everyone a wonderful week. Yes, Baruch Hashem. They got out Thursday night, they left.